Welcome to Emerging Franchise Brands, the podcast that introduces you to the visionary founders of America's fastest growing franchise opportunities. We'll also hear from industry pros as they share insights on what it really takes to achieve the elusive milestone of 100 plus locations. I am your host, Frank Fumey, founder of I9 Sports, and my 20-year journey from inception to acquisition has given me a unique perspective on how to succeed in franchising. Join me as we welcome today's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. On today's show, I have Forrest Walden from the Iron Tribe Fitness franchise. Forrest, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Frank. Glad to be on.
Yeah, well, this is going to be great. So there are so many fitness franchises out there for us, so we got a lot to cover. We want to learn about, why you guys are different and the whole bit. But sure. I think you have a unique background that led you to franchising. So let's start with, you were a franchisee?
Yeah. Well, first, I think the most unique is I'm the son of a franchisor.
Oh, we got to talk about that because, all right, you're very, very unique. There are very, very few people I know out there that are part of that family of franchising. So let's go back in time. Let's talk about, how you got involved and your dad.
Yeah, so he was a investment, basically did private investments, and a client brought him the business plan for a local franchise. It was called Express Oil Change. And the more Ricky, my dad, looked into it, really, he got excited about it. And the client ended up backing out. He said, well, if you're not going to do it, I'd like to do it. So he became a franchisee of Express Oil Change, then went on to open and own 13 of them, and then bought the company in 96. So in 96, I was off at college. And so that's when he moved from franchisee to franchisor. And so I kind of grew up around franchising, was very familiar with it. And so when I got out of Auburn, studied exercise science, was trying to figure out what in the world to do as a personal trainer to make money and not trade time for money and actually build something that would last more than just my own sweat. I knew I had to open my own thing, but I had no idea how to do it. And I stumbled across an ad for Ffitness Together, which was a franchise out of Denver, Colorado. And I thought, interesting. I didn't know anybody was franchising in the personal training space. And so I ran it by Ricky. He gave me about 4 pages of questions to ask when I went out there. And so I flew out and liked what I saw and became the first franchisee of Ffitness Together in the Southeast, June of 2001, at the ripe old age of 24 years old.
Wow. Okay. So as if it's not dramatic enough that you are a second generation franchise person in your family, but were you the first franchisee, you said, with Ffitness Together?
No, I think I was unit like 12 or 13. I mean, I was pretty early, but there was none in the Southeast. They were all Midwest, West Coast type thing.
And you're 24, you're 24 years old. I would normally say you don't know what you don't know. However, you did have a dad that was a franchisor. So how did that help?
Well, in a couple of ways. One, I opened it with a partner. We were both training at a local gym. We went in together on it. But Ricky was clearly our money. He co-signed with the bank and he said, guys, if this goes under, you work for me. And, to talk to him now, he thought it was just going to be a learning lesson for us, but we did. We made it work. But I think the biggest thing I learned was my entire life I had studied exercise. I'd studied it at school. I'd, read everything Arnold ever put out. Like I was locked in on personal training. And Rick Sikorsky, the founder and CEO of Ffitness Together, gave me the E-Myth when I opened that first location. And if your listeners have not read the E-Myth, it's one of those few books that I revisit probably once a year. I think it's timeless. But what he told me was, he said, Forrest, up to this point in your life, you've been the personal trainer. Now you are the marketer and salesman of personal training services, and never underestimate the difference. And so what I learned when I opened that studio is there was all these roles that I didn't know how to do: marketing, sales, finance, HR. And I was real comfortable on the floor training, but if I was going to grow and open multiple locations, which we ended up doing, that I would have to get off the floor, stop being the product, and really learn the business side of the business. And it just turns out that I really enjoy the business side. So I didn't know that. Never studied business. I was never one of those guys who was an aspiring entrepreneur from as long as I can remember. That was not my story. I just followed my passion and ended up in business.
Wow. So you were introduced to the E-Myth at 24 years old?
Yes.
That
It was
book had
pretty new at that time
oh
too.
my gosh, yeah. E-Myth had a profound impact on my life, and I'll save that for another time. But yeah, I couldn't imagine having access to that material as a 24-year-old. That's just absolutely amazing. Tell me, so at 24 years old, you're realizing now that this is not about fitness. This is about sales and marketing, operations, finance, technology, all those things. How did that impact you?
Well, first of all, when we did site selection, Rick was the consummate salesman, and he took me and my partner Aaron to dinner, and he laid out a map of Birmingham. We'd spent all day driving around Birmingham. Where we're going to open this first one? Where we're going to open this first one? And he said, guys, you're going to open the first one right here. You're going to open the second one here in 6 months, and you're going to open the third one here 6 months later. And my eyes were as big as the plates on the table. Like, what? I just wanted to open my own studio, and now you're putting this multi-unit dream in my head. And we hit it to the day because he laid it out there. And so in order for us to do that, I knew I couldn't be the trainer on the floor. I had to be, negotiating leases and, all the things that goes into getting these things open. But yes, marketing was a big part of that as well.
Did it feel like too much pressure for you as a 24-year-old?
I mean, there were moments when I wanted to burn it all down. I mean, not long after we opened, it was June of '01. So 3 months later was 9/11. And I didn't think people were ever going to work out again. I mean, my studio literally stopped, and I had already signed the lease on location number 2. So yeah, there's been, and then, I just come off '08 and, trying to sell high priced personal training in '08. I'm sorry, not just come off '08. Then we go, I'm thinking that was right before Iron Tribe was '08. But yeah, in Fitness Together, we went through so many peaks and valleys. Just, yeah, there were times when I was like, why did I choose probably the hardest thing to do? No one wants to get in shape, especially in Birmingham, Alabama.
So how long were you a franchisee for?
So I ended up opening 6 Fitness Togethers in Birmingham. Then I bought the rights to Alabama, Florida, North Carolina, became a master franchisee, grew that to 55 locations in my 3 states. And then I sold all that back to Fitness Together in early 2010 to open Iron Tribe.
Okay, so the obvious question is, how in the world were you able to do that, being a franchisee in a fitness franchise and able to start your own franchise company?
Yeah, so we were 100% focused on one-on-one personal training in private rooms. And it was very high touch, high focus. And I really wanted to go more to a group model. And so I was on the advisory council. I was really pushing Fitness Together to go group. They didn't want to go group. And they also wanted my territory back. So I said, well, I'd like to start over and create a group model. And I know you want my territory back. So we basically did a trade. They gave me the rights to go get started.
Wow. So they saw it not as a competitive business then. Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah, because it was a completely different model.
As the difference only being personal training versus group?
Yes.
Wow. That's unique. That is very, very unique. I'm very surprised to hear that. That's great for you. Mm-hmm. Do you think they regretted making that decision?
I think probably. Now I don't know. I mean, but maybe immediately afterwards they might have.
Yeah, I mean, you're creating a beast now with Iron Tribe. So let's move on over to Iron Tribe Fitness. So when do you start that company?
Yeah, so it was in 10, right after I sold all my Fitness Togethers back. And, what's interesting, I've now had experience as a franchisee and a master franchisee. So moving into that franchisor role, I thought would be pretty seamless. And so my goal was, because I didn't have a prototype, so I had to open one first. And then I had learned from my Fitness Together days that most investors don't get real excited about one gym. Mm-hmm. They want to see what you can do with scale. And so most of my franchisees were multi-unit, going into markets where they could build multiple locations. And so I knew I needed to establish the prototype for that. So we did that in Birmingham. We opened up 4 gyms in 2 years, from 10 to 12. And then I launched the franchise model in April of 12.
And your fitness model is unique. I know I opened the podcast by saying I want to hear how it's so different. It is. Let's talk about this semi-private group training that you guys do.
Yeah, we run a couple of different, what we call streams of programs. We do run a large group model, but we also run a semi-private personal training model. And what's interesting is I've seen pretty much the whole gamut. I've been in fitness now since 98. So I've seen a lot of fads come and go. When I first got started, pretty much everyone did one-on-one training. and it's good, and there's still a space for it, but it's super expensive, and most people don't need that high touch of service day in and day out. They don't need literally someone standing there counting their reps. And what happens as the coach is a lot of times you become more of a therapist than anything, because you don't want to say squeeze your biceps for the 800th time. And so you just start talking. So anyway, on group, it's almost the other end of that extreme. You can get lost in the group. You don't get as much individualization. If you've got a shoulder injury, it's hard to customize when you're handling, up to 20, 30 other people. What's great about group is, but there's camaraderie, there's competition, there's accountability, not just with your coach, but other people in your class. And so there's great things about group. There's great things about one-on-one. What semi-private does is it really blends those two worlds, where you can still get the camaraderie, you can still get the accountability, but you can also get the customization inside of the group. And it's a bit better value proposition for the customer because they don't have to pay the one-on-one rates. So it's really a good sweet spot for us, and we've enjoyed that program a lot.
Forrest, is that putting a much greater emphasis then on the quality of your trainers than another fitness franchise?
100%. I mean, our number one differentiator is not our programs, it's our people.
Oh,
and
okay.
we are able to offer full-time career opportunities. I've got a whole slew of coaches who've been with me 7 years longer, some 10 years and longer. Because of the way we structure it, we can pay them what they're worth. We can give them, real jobs, 401ks, and vacations and insurance and all this type of stuff, which is, that sounds basic, but in the fitness industry, that it's hard for these guys to find. So we really focus on getting the right coaches who want to do this full time for a living. They're not bartending at night or trying to, sell insurance and do this on the side, or worse yet, you're just giving them a free membership to show up and coach. Like, that's all my competitors. That is not what we do. We have full time people, world class coaches.
That's awesome. What about the franchisees? Do you have a mix of owner operated and manager operated? What is that? What does your franchisees look like?
Yeah, so we have two avatars when it comes to our franchisees. One is owner operator, and that's clear. They're passionate about fitness. They want to run the day to day. They're in there. They love it. The other one is what we call an engaged owner. And so this is someone who has a passion for fitness, has a background in business, but is not necessarily going to be in the business day to day. However, they can't be a passive owner. They can't just be an investor. We want them running specific things from an owner level, such as EOS type stuff. Man, you better be running that meeting rhythm. You better be the one, doing the employee reviews. You're probably the one pulling the marketing levers and the financial levers. But we really want owners who are engaged. And so we're probably 50-50 between owner operator and engaged owner. So as a great example, my Nashville franchisee right up the road from us, he has 5, he's got 2 more in development, but he lives here in Birmingham, 3 hours south. But he's engaged as they come. He's waking up every day thinking about that business, leading his team. And so what we've proven does not work for us, Frank, is off-site, unengaged owners. We don't want any part of it.
I don't think any of us have figured that part out.
Yeah.
If you're unengaged and, sort of out of pocket, that's a really tough. We had a hell of a challenge we tried the part-time model, and we could not get that to work. And we tried it in the very beginning. And then when the recession hit, we tried it again and realized, no, we're just, it's salmon upstream. It's so difficult because when you're not engaged, when people have another career, they're not attending all the conferences. They're not attending their coaching calls. They're not attending, national meetings and FAC calls and all that. It's a nightmare.
It is.
Yeah. What about the other unique mix, though, that you have, Forrest, is franchises and company-owned locations. So if I understand it right, you have 30 locations, but 9 of which are company-owned. So talk to me a little bit about this mix, why it's that way, and how you plan on growing.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I know this topic is actually divisive in franchising because I have heard very successful franchisors argue both sides of it.
Uh-huh.
That you should be an owner operator of your own model because, what better way to know what to build for your, what marketing to build, what operation, you're
Sure.
leading from the front. And then I've heard equally as passionately people say it's a 100% different business. It's a distraction. You just need to be a great franchisor. I grew up with a dad who was passionate on in the first camp. And so by the time he sold everything 2 years ago, I think close to 300 of his 450 units were corporately owned and run. So I had really seen a model of someone who led the chain
Right.
in operations and really used that as a platform to grow his brand. So I've always been passionate about executing the model that we sell. Honestly, Frank, I don't know how I would have navigated COVID as well as we did if I wasn't figuring it out hour to hour, sometimes day to day, right there with these franchisees. We're closed, people
Yeah.
can't come in. How do we generate revenue? How do we pivot? So I just think it's important, and we run some of the best gyms in the brand. So
Yeah.
but to your question about growth, our growth strategy is franchising. We're not necessarily looking to grow hundreds of corporate units. We're pretty comfortable with the 9 that we have.
Mm-hmm. What made you open those 9? Is it geographic reasons or just for overall developmental?
Well, five of them are right here in Birmingham where we're headquartered. And so we've had them. Those are all 10-plus-year-old locations. So that's kind of what we started with there. The other ones have been franchisees who were unengaged and didn't want to be engaged. And so we just said, well, if you don't want to run it, we'll run it. And we bought them back. And then one of them, it's a brand new one. We just opened it in Charleston, South Carolina. But I had a 5-year plus manager here who was moving there. And we believed in him, didn't want to lose him. And so we opened a new location with him.
Wow. I do believe in having a company-owned location, at least one of them. And when I franchised my very first location, where was it? Right in our backyard. I didn't intend on selling our backyard as its first location, but that's what ended up happening. And it took a few years before we were able to buy it back. Anyway, we bought back our first location after several years, which was really our backyard. And I missed not having a living laboratory, not to mention, the franchisees start looking down on you like, hey, you don't really know what's going on if you don't have a location yourself, even though we knew how to run our leagues. But I think there is something about that. Plus, you don't want your franchisees to be guinea pigs where, you're doing all your testing through them with them, right?
Well, and I had experienced that. As a franchisee, I had seen Ffitness Together roll out marketing plans that had never been tested, that were drawn up in some agency somewhere. And, we were spending the money to prove it out versus I don't roll anything out I haven't tested at my location. So I had seen that. And then when I became a master franchisee, I really saw the tension between, okay, this is what I believe is a franchisee, but now I'm starting to understand, my hat over here is kind of a franchisor. So it's interesting I don't remember how many years, 3, maybe 4 years into being a franchisor, I called Rick, who was the founder of Ffitness Together, and apologized for being Mr. Hotshot franchisee who thought he knew everything, because being a franchisor is not as easy as we might think when we're successful franchisees.
Forrest, you were a nightmare franchisee as a 24-year-old. I know it.
Yeah.
I would not have wanted to deal with you.
I was a high producer, but I got slapped on the wrist many a time for stepping outside of norms.
Great. Well, now you're the perfect franchisor. You know what it's like when people are coloring outside the lines, right?
Yep. I'll tell you a great quick story. Just
Sure.
You're making me think of it. But so this is probably 2004, and info products were relatively new. And so this guy hit me up. He's like, hey man, you're very successful. Why don't we do a series where you talk about like your best demonstrated practices of how to run a studio? And he said, I bet it will lead to franchise sales for you. So I do the thing. It was CDs back then. They sold like crazy. I did sell a franchise from it, but then Rick got a hold of it and he's like, are you literally just giving away all our secrets? And I'm like, but I'm selling franchise. So anyway, it was like, I thought he was about to kick me out of the brand. But now, if one of my franchisees was doing that and talking about all our secret sauce, I'd be like, well, what are you doing?
Come on. Well, one of the things I want to share about kind of the company-owned strategy that we try to deploy, we had a lot of challenges. I would get frustrated that the only reason why we were opening a location is because where we were getting an inquiry from a really quality prospect, no matter how much we try to target market. So we had this idea of doing this dual strategy. And The dual strategy of opening franchise locations and company-owned locations really for us didn't start until, I don't know, like maybe 10 years in. The franchisees did not take to it well because they thought that all of a sudden we're getting away from franchising when really all it was a dual strategy. It was completely sincere that we wanted to open locations and we didn't want to be limited to franchise locations only if that's, if we wanted to open a location in a great market. In fact, we were open to growing it and selling it to somebody. But for us, it didn't go well. Maybe that was partially because we didn't have that dual strategy until 10 years into the business. So by that point, we were probably about 140 locations in. You think that might create, more difficulty in the franchise network if you're that big and then you start doing company owned?
Yeah, they're going to see it as a threat, especially if you're going into a market where there's already franchisees and then they feel like you're taking multi-unit growth away from them.
Yeah, for sure. I think we could have definitely communicated that better for sure. We did open locations. Inevitably, we sold a bunch of them off and we decided to dissolve that part of the business. I found though, kind of to the point that you mentioned earlier, for us, it was a bit of a distraction. It was really, really difficult. So I'm super impressed that we were able to pull that off because we found it very distracting at times. So that's kudos to you. And of course, your dad having this background too.
Yeah, I think the only balance to that is every time I'm working on my own businesses, I'm always thinking, how do I scale what we're doing?
Yeah.
In fact, I have a brand wide call I just finished the presentation for on Tuesday with a new tech innovation based on our need to, be more aggressive on the marketing side. And I just don't know how do I, if I'm not in the lab trying to figure that out, I don't know how innovative I could be just being an ivory tower franchisor, but
I agree.
That's just been my experience.
Yeah. And how do you know as the founder when you're at the point where you can scale more quickly because you're 30 locations in, including the 9 company owned. So Forrest, tell me about that. Where's that growth curve coming into play?
Well, we have several in development right now. I think we have 5 that are in development. We're very actively marketing on the franchise side. We have a franchise development group that we work with. So I've really outsourced the sales part of it to a company that really knows, likes, and trusts us, understands what we're trying to accomplish, and more importantly, understands who we want to partner with, because we are very particular in what we're looking for in franchisees. And so, yeah, I'm excited. We really had to hit the pause button over COVID. And that was a very, very hard year for the fitness industry. I've read anywhere from 30 to 50% of gyms closed. We took a significant, probably 30% gross haircut as a brand, but have bounced back stronger. And so really back on the growth path.
That's awesome. How big is big? What's your vision for the company?
I want to get my BHAG is to be $100 million brand. So we got at least 5X.
What about geographically? Do you see this coast to coast? What's it going to take to get there?
Well, we've been, up to this point, have really been a Southeast brand. We're basically from Texas to Charleston and Tampa to Kentucky. So we've really been all Southeast. I think it can work. We're just kind of, to your point earlier, we're basically growing based on where we've gotten interest and just haven't gotten a lot of interest outside of the Southeast.
Hey, that's fine. And maybe even growing regionally is really the best bet for you, right? And kind of spreading out from there.
That way.
Again, yeah. that is a philosophy different philosophy that franchisors have to, make a decision on. Do we just go shotgun approach, or do we start from home and do we just kind of spread out?
Yeah. I think it's kind of happened more unintentionally than intentionally, but I definitely see the wisdom in staying more regional just from a support standpoint.
So Forrest, let's go back to that 24-year-old. If you had to go back to the 24-year-old now and tell him, what would be a piece of advice you would tell your younger self?
It's been such a circuitous journey. There literally have been times I thought I was never going to have to worry about money again. And there are times I felt like I was going to go bankrupt and everything in between. And so I think my advice to that kid would be, listen, it's never as good as you think it is, and it's never as bad as you think it is. Just stay the course. Keep stacking skills. Keep learning and executing. You're going to be just fine.
That is great advice for everybody, young or old. And what's been your biggest surprise, though, in franchising?
The biggest surprise is someone who comes in because they don't want to reinvent the wheel. And you take them through your whole process, and they sit down with you at Discovery Day and they say, man, I would never want to do what you guys have done. I so appreciate the systems, the technology, yada, yada, yada. And then a year in, they're reinventing the wheel and they're creating new programs and they're creating new this and new that. And you're like, I'm so confused right now. We got a playbook. So yeah, it's just, and I guess it's just that entrepreneurial itch we all have. They feel like they want to, test things, which testing's okay. But
Right.
yeah, I'm shocked when people don't execute the playbook.
Is the pot calling the kettle black?
Well, that's true. That's true.
I'm saying that lovingly as a fellow franchisor.
Yep. But it's funny when I look back at what we had as a young franchisee in that system, there wasn't a lot of structure.
Right.
Like I feel like if I had not, especially on the marketing side, if I had not veered out and found things that would work, I don't know how long I would have been open.
Right.
But then I look at what I provide and I'm like, you don't have to do any of that. It's all there. So,
I don't know. There have been so many surprises I've found in franchising. Maybe the flip side has been most surprising to me when I get somebody who pays us the big franchise fee. And then it's like, okay, I think my work is done here. It's like, are you kidding me? The work has literally just started. Like,
yes.
You bought a business. You didn't buy a piece of real estate. And that's always been kind of fascinating.
Agreed. I've seen that very same dynamic.
I think the other dynamic that's unique is in the fitness industry. The people that are buying fitness franchises because it is a passion play, is it not? I mean, if you're not passionate about fitness, you're not going to buy a fitness franchise.
100%.
And then the other challenge, which I think may be similar to something that my experience was too, because I was in sports, people knew something about it. That's why they're bringing in fitness. They come to Iron Tribe and they know something about fitness. So they're trying to put their, fingerprint on it. I don't think there's anything wrong with having guardrails that people are within. But I think you would probably also agree that what made you so successful is your ability within a system to trying things out, but as long as it's a controlled growth, right? Or controlled trial where you guys are, you have a laboratory that you guys are agreeing to work with.
Yes, absolutely. Because what I clearly did not have the ability to do was to figure out all the what ifs. I didn't know, should it be a membership gym? Should it be a personal training only gym? What kind of equipment should I? I mean, I was paralyzed by all those things. So the fact that they came and said, here's your equipment package. Here's how many square feet you're looking for. Here's your logo. Yes, it gave me a box that allowed me to kind of get my entrepreneurial feet up under me.
Right. And also the big difference, of course, I was just messing with you about the pot calling the kettle black. But seriously, though, Ffitness Together was a little bit different because it sounds like they did not have the systems and processes together. You had all this freedom because there weren't things in place. With Iron Tribe Fitness, there is a system and process in place. You have a proven successful model.
I mean, I've learned from that. As being a multi-unit franchisee, as being a master franchisee, what is needed to execute the model. So whether it's our tech, our learning management system, our documentation, or, where all the documents are stored, the support visits we do, like everything has been built out of what did I need to be a successful franchisee so that I can deliver it to them.
You, again, have the most unique experience of anybody I've interviewed. And I think that that is such a huge leadership advantage for your franchisees. Besides that obvious fact, though, what would you say is another, probably your greatest leadership strength that your franchisees would say, about you, Forrest?
I'm really passionate about the vision and our core values and kind of all the ethereal, behind the scenes, like what is our why? Why are we doing this? Real early on, I think it was one of our first franchise conference, we had a speaker talk about make sure you guys always keep the bottom line, change lives. And we've really codified that over the years of ultimately the way we're going to measure success is, are we changing lives or not? And P&L is great. Item 19 is great. But at the end of the day, it's why we start every single meeting with a life change story. So if I'm on with multiple franchisees, they got to start with give me one story of someone in your gym whose life is being changed. And so that way it's just an ongoing, constant conversation around, oh my gosh, let me tell you about Frank. He's down 30 pounds. He's off all his diabetes medication. He said, just constant,
Yeah.
constant, constant. It's just a reminder of why we do. So what am I particularly? I love telling the story. I love communicating why we started, why our core values are what they are. I love finding and rewarding my people living out our core values. So that's when I get pumped.
You're making so much of an impact on people's lives, and to start the meeting with a celebration, I think that's, first of all, that's like a cornerstone of so much in business coaching, is starting out with what's working, right? What's going well. Let's start by what are we here to celebrate?
Yeah, so we've always done a positive focus, 30 to 60 seconds on what's going well personally or professionally. And then we just stack that. So now it's positive focus, life change story. So you do something personal and then you talk about someone who you're impacting.
That's great. Tell me, what would be some advice you'd give to people who are considering joining Iron Tribe as a franchise? What do they need to know?
Yeah, I would think a couple things. One, you need to check a couple of boxes that, you are passionate about fitness. I find it interesting. I think in a lot of franchise spaces, when someone says, there's, the question in the questionnaire says, what other businesses are you exploring? I think it's pretty common in other franchise spaces to find people who are exploring a wide variety of businesses. Maybe they're working with a broker and the broker's saying, based on your parameters, you could do oil change business, a battery business, a cell phone business, or a fitness business. But when I'm talking to people, no one ever says I'm looking at anything else, because they're passionate about fitness. Now, they may be looking at other brands inside of the fitness industry. And I think largely that's because this is a passion and a lifestyle play. And I also am a firm believer that not only do I need to operate my own gyms, but I need to live from the front with my own body. And so if I'm not, and again, it doesn't mean you have to be Arnold Schwarzenegger or getting on stage, but you better be working out 3 to 4 times a week. You better be doing your own program. You better be eating healthy. Like, this is a more is caught than taught type of industry. And you're not going to have a lot of credibility if you're not living it. So at the end of the day, is fitness something you're passionate about? And then the other thing to really marry up to that is, are you a leader? Do you know how to build, motivate, and lead a team? And do you have a track record of that? Have you done it, in college? Have you done it with your career? Have you done it? Have you volunteered outside of I need to see a track record of you leading, because when you become a franchisee, it's not going to be about you and your skills inside of the gym. It's going to be about you hiring, building, training, using our tools to build up your team. But ultimately, you've got to be leading that team. So if those two things align, we have a proven process that works and can be scaled.
Sure. And it's a challenge if they're not. If they don't, if they don't have that personality where they think it's all about being in the gym. It's just like any franchise concept. If you're passionate about the food, you need to be, that's great, but you need to be really passionate about the business of food, or you're passionate about sports. You got to be really passionate about management, marketing, finance, accounting, technology, because ultimately that's really what's going to make this thing tick, especially in your model, where the only way you're going to survive is through scale of, and through other people.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And then the only thing I would add is you do have to love people.
Yes.
And not only our customers, I think that's obvious, but your team. Like, you really have to want your team to win and build them a career. And when you do that, it's a win-win-win solution. Clients win because they have the best coaches in the brand. Your staff wins because now they can do what they love and build a career, and you win because you have great margins and a successful business.
Right. That's awesome. I'm curious. Okay. What's maybe one piece of most memorable piece of advice, though, that your dad gave you about franchising that maybe has influenced you?
If he has said it once, he's said it 10,000 times. Success at the store level, nothing else matters.
Yes.
Don't try to make money on anything else but royalties. Don't try to nickel and dime and sell your equipment or mark up your software or mark up your marketing. No, you pass on all your savings to your franchisee. You make them successful at the store level, and growth will take care of itself.
That might be one of the greatest pieces of advice we heard on this show of all the episodes I've recorded.
Well, he's a very smart man.
Sure is. I got to imagine, though, there's got to be some nights that he came home and he was, he had one hell of a day at the office, and, franchising wasn't all that. I know for me, my kids grew up, of course, with me coming home every night and telling them, how my day was. We just chit chat, talk about, how school, and there was some days I really came home super stressed out. And I would imagine not every day's, rosy. Did that ever play into, do I want to get into this? Do I really want to get into this? Because Dad didn't always have great days.
Yes, absolutely. Plenty of those memories.
But it helped, right? It helped you so much.
Yeah.
Because it also helped you form your own opinion on what franchising is. And I would imagine through that experience as being a child of a franchisor, that you really ultimately, you saw the recipe that really worked, and you saw the relationships that Dad built with his franchisees.
Yeah, not only it did, but not only that, he went through, I think, 3 different rounds of private equity, and he let me have a front row seat to that. I sat and watched, the firms come in and pitch, and the leadership team wrestling on who should we decide to go with. And yeah, so it's been just a really good educational journey to, have a front row seat to all that.
Wow. This is good stuff, man. I hope when you're talking to potential franchisees, or I hope your franchise network really grasps your background and everything you've seen, Forrest, because you really play a very unique role in franchising in your, with your company. You've seen things that most of us have never seen, because you've worn every hat.
Yeah, he's, I think they see it. He's spoken at our convention a few times. I did a big podcast with him, so everybody understood that story, and I think they value that. But yeah, I've got some great franchisees for sure. And what's fun is losing to them in revenue and celebrating them on stage, and then turn around and telling my corporate managers, okay, let's never let that happen again. So we have this very competitive atmosphere. And in fact, right now we're gunning with a Tennessee location for the number 1 location this year. Just it's neck and neck every month, but it'll be interesting to see who wins it.
If somebody was interested in being an Iron Tribe franchise owner, tell me, how can they get additional information? Where do they go?
Yeah, just go to irontribefranchise.com. It's all laid out there of what the next steps are, and give you a good understanding of who we are, what our franchisees look like, what our investment range is, all that type of stuff's right there on the website. And we'd love to talk to you. We're looking for a good fit. So if it's not that, we'll part friends. But if it is, we'll continue to take steps. And who knows, you may be our next brand ambassador.
And do you want to keep still looking for locations mainly in the Southeast, or are you open to other areas of the country?
We're open to anywhere
that
makes sense. But yeah, right now, the current footprint is Southeast.
Forrest, you've given so much good information here that I think is going to help not only aspiring entrepreneurs looking to franchise their concept, but people that are already in this business with your experience. I usually finish with a tip jar, and it's that, that one piece of advice you would give to an aspiring entrepreneur that's thinking of franchising their concept. So what do you got for that person?
You are the greatest personal improvement project that you will ever have. And all I can say is be the person who is listening to podcasts, who's reading books, who's stacking skills. An investment in you can never be taken away. Even if you fail at something, it's not a fail, it's a lesson learned. And if you stay at it, you will be successful.
Perfect. Forrest, thank you so much for being on this show. I appreciate it. I'm going to continue to watch the growth of Iron Tribe Fitness. And thanks again. Have a great one.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.